All right, today we have a 2005 Saab. It's a 92X Arrow with a 2.0. We're going to be changing both of the drive axles in the front because the inner tripods blew apart. So first thing we're going to do, I'm going to show you, and we're going to get started. First thing we're going to do is obviously we took the wheel off of the car already. I just did that to save a little bit of time. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen up the caliper so we can remove it from the car. And the way you're going to do that is you're just going to pry on the caliper just a slight little bit, just to push the piston back in just a little bit. And you get a 14mm wrench, and we're going to remove the caliper. We have to take the caliper off the car, so we can just crack the caliper bolts loose, and then we can take these out by hand. Just unscrew them all the way out by hand and put them on the side because you're going to reuse these later. We're going to take the caliper off the car, but we're not going to leave it hanging by itself. We're going to actually support it so that the line is not being stretched. And I just take a piece of wire and hook it on the caliper and just reposition it up out of the way so it's not going to interfere with you. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the knuckle from the car itself. And the steering knuckle, the caliper mounting knuckle comes off by just removing two 17mm bolts in the back over here. And you can just break them loose. Top one is a little bit tighter. We're going to use a wrench on that because the strut mounting bolt is right up in the way. I couldn't get a socket onto it, so you just take out the two bolts, unscrew them all the way out, and then we're going to take this mounting bracket out of the way. Alright, we're just going to take that out and put it to the side for now. The rotor's got to come off the car, but before you take the rotor off the car, you're going to have to put it back on the same place you took it off because everything is so rusted inside there. Just mark it with a piece of chalk so you know where you took it off. And you've got to be putting it back on the same way, otherwise you're going to wind up with a pulsating brake pedal. Unless you're changing the brakes, then it doesn't matter. Alright. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this nut off right here. If you have an impact gun, fine. If you don't have an impact gun, you'll need to remove this nut before you took the brakes off. You'd have an assistant hold the brake pedal in the car. You put the nut on here, the socket onto the nut, and then you would just remove it. But to save a little bit of time, I'm going to just put this socket on and take it off with an air gun. Now, this particular car is extremely rusty, so we're just going to clean up some of the rust so I can get this in here. You may run into the same problem, because obviously as things get older, they do tend to rust a little bit. In this case, it's not going to matter because we're going to be replacing that nut with a new one. As you can hear, it's sometimes pretty rusty and extremely difficult to get them off, especially when they get so badly rusted like this. So this we're going to throw away. We're not going to use it. We're going to get a new one. The axle already. In case you're trying to take the axle out and it's stuck on and you can't remove it out of the hub, you just screw the nut on by hand, just like this. And what you would do is put one hammer inside on the axle itself, and you hit it in the back with the other one, and it'll knock it through. In this case, we didn't need to because the axle is already loose in the hub guard. Alright, next thing we're going to do then, we're going to turn the wheel over this way here. And let me just grab you and I'll show you what I'm going to do. Two things I'm going to be doing. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be removing the tie rod end right here from the steering knuckle. We're going to take this cotter pin out and we're going to remove that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove that ball joint right down there also. So let me start on it and I'll show you how it goes. Okay, I hope you can see okay, but I'm going to be removing this nut right here. I'm going to take that nut out. So we're going to just take this cotter pin and bend the cotter pin up and out of the way. Let me just show you what I'm doing in here so you have an idea. What I did is just bend the cotter pin up and out of the way, and then we'll pull that cotter pin out. Usually you can just work it back and forth, and we can get it to start to move out. So let me do that. And then once you have it pushed out a little bit, you put a pair of cutting pliers on it, and you can just pull it all the way out. Now we know that, or I should say, I know that that's a 19mm nut that's on there. You can use an impact gun if you have one, or you can just break it loose by hand too. Really not that hard. Take the nut all the way out. We got the nut out. Now what we're going to do is we're going to separate the tie rod end from the steering knuckle itself. And the way you do that, take the nut off and then you hit this right here, a couple of really sharp raps with the hammer, and it'll pop down. So watch. Looks easy, but you're going to have a hard time getting that out of there. Just be careful. Don't damage the vacuum plate and you should be fine. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect that lower ball joint, as I mentioned to you before. Yeah, this lower ball joint right here, the same thing, we're going to take that cotter pin out. You grab your cutting pliers and you hook it on the end over here and you just pull it right out from the lower ball joint. And we know that that's a 19mm also, so you can use either a socket or you can use an air gun, whatever you prefer. I'll just use this because it's here right now. Unscrew it all the way out. And the last thing we're going to do, we will have to separate that ball joint, but we're not going to do that right now. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the stabilizer link right here from the lower control arm, because we're going to need to push the control arm down. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a 12mm socket and a 12mm wrench, and we're going to take that bolt out right here. And before you take this nut all the way off, just tap it, get it to move out, and then you can unscrew it by hand, push it out, and take this out. And we're going to reuse this, so we'll take that for now. But we are going to reuse that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to separate that ball joint down there. To make a tool to separate these is a fork. You're probably going to need to get this fork to get it out of there, because I think you're going to have a problem trying to remove it any other way. Just slide the fork in through the bottom between the control arm and the knuckle. And just hit it a couple times. And it pops right out. And what we're going to do, we're going to push down on the lower control arm, just so that the ball joint pops through the bottom of the control arm. And now our axle is already loose, so we're just going to remove this. I'll reposition you in a second there, and the axle is out of the knuckle, is out of the bearing. So the axle is ready to come out. Now I'm going to grab a pry bar, and I'm going to show you how to remove the axle from underneath the vehicle. So give me 1 second, and I'll grab my tools and I'll be right back. Okay, now this is looking at the other end of the axle where it goes into the transmission up underneath here. And the way you get that out is it's fairly easy. You just get in here with the pry bar, put it behind here, and you just pry it, and it just pops right out. All right, once you have it loose here, we just go up to this axle and we just pull it, and it pops all the way out. Okay, coming right out. So, right, just put your pry bar in here, and push it forward like this, and it pulls it right out. I'm going to go on the other side now. We're going to pull it out, and we'll put the new one in. Okay, now we have the axle popped out of the trans itself. We're going to pull the axle shaft out of here. What we're going to do is we're going to do this as quick as possible, because when we pull this axle out, we're going to lose some fluid. Make sure you have a bucket underneath to catch it. We're going to pull this one out, and we're going to put the new one in right away. So we just pull it out, take our new one, put it right in, and you turn it and push, and you feel it snap right in. And that's it. The new axle's in. So to take a look at it is, I just wanted to make sure that the axle was popped all the way back in as far as it's supposed to be, which it is. All right, so if it doesn't pop in all the way, you turn it, you get on it with a hammer, you leave the nut on the end of the shaft, and you just tap it in a little bit with a hammer, and it'll pop right in. All right, let's put the rest back together. Okay, now once we have it lined up, we'll just put the cotter pin back through the lower ball joint. You just bend it over, and then you're all set with that. All right, next thing we want to do is we're going to tighten up this nut right here on the front, on the axle itself. And the way to do that is you just take your air gun, or if you don't have an air gun, you can tighten this up later. And then what you got to do on this one, you have to lock it back in position so that it doesn't rotate out. And you see on the top it's got that little keyway right there. You just put a chisel on it like that, and you strike it down, and it locks it right in place. I'll show you how that's done. You put it right on top of it, you just tap it, and it locks it in place, so that it's not gonna move. See what I mean? It's just locked in there, so it isn't going anywhere. All right. And what I told you about the cotter pin is tight underneath here. Next thing I'm going to do is we're going to reconnect the tie rod end on this side over here. Basically, just stick it through here, and then we're going to put the nut back on it, and then we'll tighten it down all the way, and then we're going to put our cotter pin right back through that hole right there. So let me tighten that up, and I'll show you. and you just keep turning it until it lines up so that you can get your cotter pin through it. I'm just going to put the camera down for a second and I'll show you. And once you've got it lined up, you just slide your cotter pin through here and just bend the cotter pin up. Up out of the way. Alright, cotter pins are in. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to reattach the lower control arm to the stabilizer link. So let me just grab my tools and I'll get started on that. Get the bolt back through a little bit and then just tap it and it comes right through. Once you've got it through, just put your 12mm nut back onto it. Once you have it through, you put your 12mm nut on. Grab the ratchet and tighten the lower bolt up. Doesn't have to be real tight, just fairly small. Again, if you got air powered tools, obviously you want to use it. I'm just showing you how you would do it if you had no air powered tools. Alright, so let's review. We got the outer tie rod end is tight. We have the stabilizer link mounted back through the bottom here. The bolt is through and tight. We tightened up the nut on the axle and the hub bearing, tightened it down all the way, peened it over so now it's locked into its groove. Next thing we're going to do now is we're going to put the brake rotor back on. And remember how we marked the stud? We marked the stud with the yellow chalk, and now we're going to put the rotor on the same way it came off. So let me do that, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, we marked the rotor with the yellow chalk, so we're going to take that and put it back on to the knuckle the way it came off. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remount our mounting bracket. Just put that on. See if I can turn this a little bit, give you an idea of what I'm doing. Okay, put it back through there and then reattach it with the bolts. And before you tighten up the one on the bottom, you got to catch both top and bottom in place first. remember the tight one was a little bit tight. We couldn't get in there with a ratchet because the bolt from the strut is in the way. So we're just going to use a regular 17 millimeter wrench to tighten that up. Alright, now we're going to tighten up the next 17 millimeter on the bottom. Alright, that's tight. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to mount our caliper back on to the knuckle so we can take off our tool that held it in place. Position the caliper back on and just slide it down. I'll show you what I'm doing in 1 second. Let me just catch this in there all the way. Okay. This is what I wanted to show you. When you put this back on, make sure that these parts of the mounting, a little bit hard to see, sorry about that. Make sure that these flat pieces on the top and the bottom line up in the caliper right there, and that they don't sit out further out behind it and cause a problem. Alright, so put it into position like that, and then we'll catch those bolts. We know that was 12 millimeters, so we get our 12 millimeter socket, and we can tighten everything up. I'm sorry, I was wrong. We grab our 14 millimeter socket, and we can tighten these bolts all the way up. You don't want to tighten them too tight, you don't want to snap them, and obviously you don't want to leave it too loose, you don't want them coming out. All right. Same thing on the top up here. That's why I like this ratchet, because it's got the flexible head on it so you can get in at lots of different angles. Alright, let me show you one more time what I meant about that. See how these are, the flat part is down on the bottom right there, and the top part the same thing. Alright, so that's it. Caliper's on, knuckles mounted, the bolt is tight through here, the lower ball joint is tight with the cotter pin in it, outer tie rod end is tight with the cotter pin through it, and on the lower stabilizer link, we got that bolt tight. That's it. All done. Next thing we're going to do is just put the wheel on, and then we're going to road test the vehicle. And last but not least, we're going to check the fluid inside the trans to make sure that we didn't lose any fluid, and if so, we're going to add to it. That's it. All right, good luck, and any comments or any questions, just drop me a line. I'll be more than happy to respond back to you. Thank you. I'll see you on the next one.